For 10 years, I rebuilt my father's dying company while my brother drank away his life. At the shareholders' meeting, he had me fired in front of everyone. I walked out silently. But Monday morning, when he entered his new CEO office, he finally understood what I owned. Before we get back to today's story, I have some exciting news to share. We have officially launched a brand new channel called Layer of Lies. Over there, we are dedicating our platform to bringing you the most satisfying, jaw-dropping corporate revenge stories on the internet. We're diving deep into cutthroat office politics, backstabbing bosses, toxic coworkers, and the incredible women who turned the tables and came out on top. Grab your coffee, because we are serving all the boardroom drama with full context, community reactions, and top-tier narration that brings every power move to life. Make sure to subscribe to Layer of Lies right now so you don't miss out. You'll find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag. Thank you for your continued support as we grow this community. Now, back to the story. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, and it came from someone I barely knew. I was in my office on the 14th floor, going over quarterly projections for the third time that day, when my desk phone lit up with an internal extension I didn't recognize. Extension 4402. I remember the number because I stared at it for a full 3 seconds before picking up, wondering who at White Industrial Solutions I hadn't already spoken to that week. "Adrian White," I said. "Ms. White, hi, this is Colby from the corporate secretary's office. I just wanted to confirm your attendance at Thursday's special shareholders meeting." I set down my pen. My father's pen, actually, a heavy black Montblanc with a gold nib engraved along the barrel with 4 words in his tight handwriting: "Build slow, sign careful." He'd given it to me the day I finished my MBA, and I'd carried it every working day since he died. I laid it neatly across the top of my legal pad. "I'm sorry," I said. "What meeting?" There was a pause on the other end. A young pause, the kind where somebody realizes they might be standing in the middle of a situation they don't understand. The special meeting called by Mr. Damian White. Thursday at 10. It went out on the notice last week. I just wanted to confirm because I don't have you on the RSVP list. "Colby," I said carefully, "can you email me the notice? Right now." "Of course, Ms. White, I'll send it over." I hung up. I sat there for a moment, in the office my father had once run when this company was little more than 3 trucks and a warehouse leased on a handshake. Rain was starting to hit the windows in slow, uncertain drops. Then my computer chimed, and there it was. Notice of special meeting of shareholders, White Industrial Solutions, Inc. Called by Damian S. White, holder of record. I read it twice. It listed one item of business. Item 1, removal of current Chief Executive Officer and appointment of new Chief Executive Officer. I picked up my father's pen. I held it between my fingers like a rosary. And for the first time in a very long time, I let myself feel something I had spent 10 years refusing to feel about my only brother. Not anger. Not yet. Just the quiet, cold recognition of a person who had made a promise to himself, long ago, that when this moment finally came, she would be ready. Because I had known, in some corner of me I never spoke aloud, that my brother would try to take this from me one day. I had just always hoped he wouldn't. I did not call Damian. I did not call Uncle Rico. I did not call anyone. Instead, I stood up, walked to my window, and looked out at the rail yard on the east edge of our property, where a line of dark blue-white industrial trucks was being loaded with heat exchange units bound for a refinery in Corpus Christi. 10 years ago, when I took over from my dying father, we had 4 trucks left and a bank line of credit that had already been called. Now we had 87 trucks, 3 manufacturing facilities, a distribution hub in Reno, and a customer list that included 2 of the largest energy companies in North America. 100 million in revenue last year. 112 if the fourth quarter closed the way I expected. And my brother, who had not set foot in this building in 9 years, had just called a meeting to fire me. I opened my desk drawer and took out a small leather notebook I kept there. On the first page, in pencil, I had written the date my father died, March 3, 2015. Below it, another date, March 4, 2015. That was the day Damian had shown up at the funeral drunk, in a suit that didn't fit, and told a small crowd of my father's oldest friends that he was going to take the reins now. He had gone home that night, gotten drunker, and disappeared for the better part of a decade. I had run the company alone. Well, not alone. Yolanda Reyes had been at my side from month one. Yolanda was our chief operating officer now, but back then she had been a shift supervisor with a clipboard and a gift for seeing 3 moves ahead. My father had hired her the year before he got sick. On his last lucid afternoon in the hospice, he had squeezed my hand and rasped, "Keep Yolanda close. She sees the whole board." I picked up my cell and texted her one line, "Come to my office, close the door." She was there in 90 seconds. Yolanda is 53, built like a woman who has lifted actual boxes in her life, and she has the calm expression of a person who has already survived worse than whatever you're about to tell her. I handed her my laptop with the meeting notice on the screen. She read it twice, the same way I had. Then she looked up. "He's been in the building," she said. "When?" "Twice last month. Once the month before. I didn't tell you because he came in with Uncle Rico both times, and I assumed it was family. He never asked for you." "Who did he ask for?" Yolanda's jaw tightened. 3 board members, separately, one at a time. He brought a man with him, nice suit, silver at the temples, called himself a consultant. "A name?" "Preston Halloway." I wrote the name down on my legal pad underneath my father's pen, and I felt a small, cold thing settle into my stomach. That afternoon, I did what I had told myself I would not do. I called Damian. He picked up on the 4th ring, and I could tell from the ambient sound behind him that he was somewhere quiet, somewhere careful. Not a bar, not a car. A hotel lobby maybe, or an office he'd borrowed. "Adrian," he said. His voice was smooth, sober, rehearsed. That was the first thing that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. My brother had never spoken to me in a rehearsed voice. He had yelled at me, cried at me, mumbled at me, once, memorably, apologized to me at 3 in the morning from a jail in Reno, but he had never sounded prepared before. "I got the notice," I said. "I thought you would." "You want to explain?" "Not on the phone. Damian, this is our father's company." "It's my company too, Adrian." A pause. "I've had a long time to think. I'm not who I was. I have people around me now who see what I could be. I want to come home." "Then come home, don't stage a coup." He laughed, not cruelly, almost sadly, as if I had said something naive. "It's not a coup if the shareholders vote for it. See you Thursday." He hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. Then I reached down, opened my jacket pocket, and closed my fingers around my father's fountain pen. It was warm from my body. It felt heavier than it should have, the way it always did in moments like this. Build slow, sign careful. He had said it to me 100 times growing up. Every contract, every lease, every settlement, he had made me read it 3 times before he'd let me sign anything. Damian had always been in the other room during those lessons. Damian had never had the patience to read anything twice, let alone 3 times. He had signed for his first credit card at 19 without reading the interest rate. He had signed away his half of our childhood home to pay off a friend's debt at 23. My brother had never met a piece of paper he did not want to skim. I looked at the pen. I looked at the meeting notice on my screen, and for the first time I let myself think a thought I had been circling for the better part of an hour. You don't know what you're voting on, Damian. You never do. To understand what I did next, you have to understand what the last 10 years had cost me. When my father was diagnosed, White Industrial was 34 years old and dying. Our biggest client had gone to a competitor. Our best engineer had retired. The bank had frozen our expansion line and was making noise about calling the operating one. My father, who had built the company out of a leased garage in 1981, spent his last 6 months trying to teach me everything he had learned in 34 years. He would sit propped up in his hospice bed, and I would sit at the foot with a legal pad, and he would talk until he couldn't. About suppliers, about union contracts, about which competitors had honor and which ones would sell you their own mother for a percentage point. I was 28 years old. I had a law degree, an MBA, and no experience running anything larger than a study group. I was also, at the time, married to a man named Christopher who could not understand why I would give up a partner track offer at a firm in Chicago to move home and try to save a struggling logistics company in a state he had never wanted to live in. Christopher and I divorced 14 months after my father's funeral. He was not cruel about it. He just said one Sunday morning over cold coffee, "You married the company, Adrian. I'm just the guy who watches you do it." He was not wrong. I have never held it against him. I did not date after that, not seriously. I told myself it was because I was busy. In truth, I was afraid that if I brought a man into my life, he would ask me to choose, and I already knew what my answer would be. I worked. Yolanda worked beside me. We renegotiated every supplier contract in the first 6 months. We let go of 12 people, which was the hardest thing I had ever done, and hired back 4 of them within 2 years at better wages. We picked up a small aerospace subcontract that no one else wanted because the specs were impossible, and we hit those specs, and that subcontract turned into a 5-year deal, and that 5-year deal turned into the foundation of everything that came after. By year 5, we were profitable. By year 7, we had bought out our biggest regional competitor. By year 9, a private equity firm out of Dallas had offered me $240 million for the whole thing, and I had said no, and I had said no again 3 months later when they came back at 280. Because it wasn't for sale. Because my father had built it. Because my mother, who had died when I was 15, was buried under a headstone that had the company logo carved into one corner at her request. Because Yolanda's daughter was working in our accounting department now, and 87 families depended on the trucks in that rail yard, and this company was not a number to me. It was a body I had put back together, cell by cell. And in all 10 of those years, Damian had called me exactly 4 times. Once to ask for money. Once from a hospital in Tucson. Once, sober for 6 weeks, to tell me he was proud of me, a call that made me cry so hard in my car that I had to pull over. And once, drunk again, to tell me our father had always loved me more, and that was fine, because I had the personality for it. I had never once tried to cut him out. His shares were his shares. Our father had left us equal ownership on paper, 28% to each of us, with the remaining 44% held by a mix of Uncle Rico, 3 of my father's old business partners, an employee stock plan, and a small block held by a family trust our grandfather had set up in the 60s. On paper, Damian and I were equals. In practice, I had run this company alone for a decade, and he had signed every proxy without reading it, which brought me to Preston Halloway. Yolanda got me a photo of him by Wednesday morning. She has a friend in HR at a golf resort outside Scottsdale where Damian had been living, on and off, for the past 2 years. The photo showed a man in his mid-40s in a pale gray suit, silver at the temples, the kind of tan a person cultivates rather than earns. He had a good smile, too good, the kind of smile that has been practiced in a mirror. I ran his name through 3 databases before lunch. His LinkedIn said he was a strategic turnaround consultant with a firm called Halloway Partners LLC, incorporated in Delaware. His bio mentioned an MBA from a school whose registrar had no record of him when I called that afternoon under a different name. He claimed a decade at a private equity firm in Houston that, when I called their general counsel, a woman I had negotiated against twice and respected, had never heard of him. But it was the small thing that told me. It's always the small thing. On his firm's website, in the About section, Preston Halloway said he had grown up in a family manufacturing business in Ohio. In an interview he had given to a small business podcast 2 years earlier, he had said his father was a cardiologist in Vermont. Both could be true, I suppose. People have complicated families. But nobody who is telling the truth changes their origin story between 2 public documents. I printed the 2 pages. I laid them side by side on my desk. And I understood, with the clean, cold clarity I usually reserved for a difficult contract, exactly what was happening. Preston Halloway had found my brother at a bar or a card table or a rehab reunion somewhere in Arizona. Preston had listened to Damian talk about his sister and the family business and the 28% he had never bothered to understand. Preston had befriended him. Preston had gotten him sober enough to be dangerous. And Preston had walked him, step by patient step, into a plan. The plan was simple and it was old. Get the alcoholic heir to bring you inside as a consultant. Court the board, vote out the sister, install the heir as CEO, then quietly restructure, sell off, or lever up the assets until nothing was left but a shell and a signature. Damian would end up broke again, probably drunker than before. Preston would end up somewhere warm with a new name and a new bio about growing up in a family manufacturing business in Ohio. And my father's company would be gone. I held the pen in my hand. Build slow, sign careful. I thought about Thursday morning. I thought about the boardroom and the long walnut table my father had bought at an estate sale in 1987 and the shareholders who would file in one by one. I thought about my brother's rehearsed voice. I thought about Preston Holloway's practiced smile. And I decided, sitting there with the rain still tapping at the windows, that I was not going to fight them on Thursday. I was going to let them win. Because there was something Damian had never learned to do, and Preston had assumed he already had. He had never learned to read what he was signing. Thursday morning, I wore the navy suit my father had bought me the week I passed the bar. I don't know why. Sentiment, maybe. Or maybe I wanted him in the room with me, even if only in a stitch of wool across my shoulders. The boardroom filled slowly. Uncle Rico came first, in a jacket that had not fit him properly since 2011, and he would not meet my eyes. That told me most of what I needed to know. Then the three old partners of my father, Mel Aronofsky, Peter Bloom, and Jim Kettering, men I had grown up calling by their first names, men who had eaten at my mother's table. Then the employee representative, a shift lead named Danny who looked as if he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Then the trustee for the family block, a lawyer named Fenwick I had spoken to perhaps 3 times in 10 years. Then Damian. Then Preston Holloway. My brother had lost weight. He looked, to my quiet astonishment, well, clear-eyed, barbered. His suit fit him the way a suit fits a man who has been measured for it recently. He nodded at me across the table with something that was almost tenderness, and it landed harder than anger would have. Preston sat down beside him and set out a leather folio with a small gold clasp. He caught my eye once and smiled the practiced smile from the website. I did not smile back. Damian stood. He read from a paper. He said that after long reflection, and with the guidance of trusted advisors, he had come to believe that the company his father built required a new direction and a new hand at the wheel. He said the numbers were strong, yes, but the culture had become conservative to the point of ossification. He said he loved his sister. He actually said that. He said he loved his sister, but that love sometimes required difficult decisions. He proposed the removal of Adrian White as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. He proposed the appointment of Damian S. White as Chief Executive Officer. He proposed Preston Holloway as Chief Strategy Officer, reporting to the CEO. They called the vote. Uncle Rico raised his hand for the motion, and he still would not look at me. Mel Aronofsky raised his hand. Peter Bloom raised his hand. Jim Kettering hesitated and then, watching the others, raised his hand. Danny abstained. The trustee Fenwick voted with the family block, which was for the motion. I did not raise my hand. It was over in under 4 minutes. Damian stood again. He did not gloat. That was almost worse. He said quietly, "Adrian, we'd like your keys and your badge by end of business today. Please leave the pen." He meant my father's pen. He knew I carried it. He wanted it in front of the room. I laid the pen on the table. I stood up. I said, "Congratulations, Damian." I looked at Preston. I said, "Mr. Holloway, welcome to White Industrial." My voice did not shake. I have negotiated too many contracts in my life for my voice to shake. I walked out. In the hallway, Yolanda was waiting for me with a cardboard box that had a coffee cup, a framed photograph of my father, and nothing else in it. That was on purpose. We had discussed it. "Are we ready?" She said quietly. "We're ready," I said. I picked the pen up off the table on my way out. Damian, who was already shaking Mel Aronofsky's hand, did not notice. Preston did. His eyes tracked me across the room. He watched me put the pen in my inside pocket. He said nothing. He had no idea what he had just watched. I got in my car in the parking garage, and I sat there for a full 10 minutes before I turned the key. Not crying, not raging, just sitting. Then I drove to Margaret Chen's office downtown. Maggie had been my closest friend at law school and my company's outside counsel for 8 years. She had also, at my request, spent the last 4 months quietly doing something on the side, something I had asked her to prepare without ever quite letting myself believe I would need to use it. When I walked into her conference room, she took one look at my face and said, "So he did it." "He did it. You want to move." I sat down. I took the pen out of my pocket and laid it on her table. "Maggie," I said, "I want you to walk me through it, all the way through, from the top." She opened a black binder that was already on the table. It was thick. It had a red tab on the spine that said simply white structure. Here is what my brother had voted on Thursday morning and what he did not know he had voted on. He had voted to remove the Chief Executive Officer of White Industrial Solutions, Inc., and he had voted to install himself as the new CEO of White Industrial Solutions, Inc. That was correct. That was legal. That was final. But White Industrial Solutions, Inc. was, and had been for the past 6 years, a holding entity, a parent shell, a name on a door. The trucks in the rail yard did not belong to it. The 3 manufacturing facilities did not belong to it. The Reno distribution hub did not belong to it. The aerospace subcontract did not belong to it. The customer contracts, the tooling, the supply agreements, the patents on the 2 proprietary heat exchange designs we had developed in 2019, none of it belonged to White Industrial Solutions, Inc. All of it belonged to a wholly separate operating company called SMW Operations, LLC. SMW stood for Salvatore Marchetti White, my father's full name. I had created SMW Operations, LLC 6 years earlier, on the advice of a tax attorney and with Maggie's help, as part of what any competent corporate lawyer will tell you is standard practice for a company our size. Separate the operating assets from the holding entity for liability and tax purposes. I had migrated every meaningful contract, every asset, every patent, every real property lease, every trademark, into SMW Operations over the course of 18 careful, boringly documented months. The holding company still owned the shares of SMW Operations, but only 90% of them. The other 10% I held personally, in my own name, as founder's equity, in exchange for the intellectual property I had personally developed and contributed to the operating company during the migration. That 10% came with something the paperwork called Class A founder's rights, which included, among other things, sole authority to appoint and remove the chief executive officer of the operating company. Not the holding company. The operating company. The one that actually did things. Damian, on Thursday morning, had become the CEO of a name on a door. I was, and remained, the CEO of everything that name had ever stood for. Maggie let me sit with it for a moment. "He didn't read the org chart," she said. "He never reads anything," I said. "Preston did." Preston saw the top of the pyramid. He didn't scroll down. Maggie tapped the binder. "There's more. The bank line, the $80 million revolver, is held by SMW Operations. The insurance policies are held by SMW Operations. Payroll runs through SMW Operations." On Monday morning, when Damian walks into that office, he will have the title of CEO of a company that has no employees, no revenue, no bank account with more than operating float in it, and no legal authority over any of the assets he thinks he just took. I nodded slowly, then let's give him what he asked for. Maggie looked at me, meaning. Let him have Monday morning, let him walk in, let him sit down, let Preston sit down, let them find out the way I want them to find out. She smiled small and tight, and Preston. "That," I said, "is a separate conversation. I need you to find someone for me." I slid a piece of paper across the table. On it, I had written a name I had spent Wednesday night tracking down through public court filings in 3 states. Alina Kowalski. Cleveland, Ohio. Maggie read the name, she looked up. Who is she? She's the woman Preston Halloway did this to 5 years ago. She lost a family printing business her grandfather started in 1954. The lawsuit she filed against him was dismissed on a technicality before it ever reached discovery. She's a bookkeeper now at a dental office. I want to know if she'd like to be in a room with him again. Maggie found Alina Kowalski by Friday afternoon. She was 51 years old, and when Maggie called her and explained who I was and what I was looking at, she was quiet for a long time on the line. Then she said, "I've been waiting 5 years for somebody to ask me that question." We flew her in Saturday. I did not go to the airport. Yolanda did. She brought Alina to a small hotel near our headquarters, and by 7 that evening, the 3 of us were sitting in a corner booth at a diner Yolanda's cousin owned, drinking bad coffee out of thick white mugs, and Alina was telling me, in careful, methodical sentences, exactly how Preston Halloway operated. He always found his target through a family member with a weakness. In Alina's case, it had been her younger brother, a gambler. In Damian's case, it was alcohol. Preston would befriend the weak family member first, for 6 months to a year, patient as a fisherman. He would help them get healthier, genuinely healthier, at least for a while, because a healthy, weak person is more useful than a sick one. Then he would use them as the wedge. He always presented himself as a consultant. He always had a Delaware LLC. He always had a slightly different origin story depending on who was listening. And he had, Alina told me, an actual name which was not Preston Halloway. She had eventually tracked it down through a private investigator she could barely afford. His real name was Peter Halberstam. He had a prior conviction for wire fraud in New Jersey from 2009 that he had served 11 months for. He had been operating under the Halloway name since 2013. Alina had all of this in a folder. She slid it across the diner table to me. Her hand shook a little as she did it. "I couldn't afford to keep going," she said. "My lawyer dropped me. The court dismissed me. I didn't know what else to do." She looked at me directly. "If you can put him in a room where he has to answer for what he did to my family, Ms. White, I don't need anything else from this. I just want to be there." I said, "You'll be there." Sunday, I did 3 things. I called Detective Anita Ruiz of the Scottsdale Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, whose card Alina had given me, and I told her what I had. She said she would like to speak with Ms. Kowalski again, and would like copies of my documentation, and would like to know where Mr. Halberstam would be on Monday morning at approximately 9 a.m. I gave her the address of my former office building. I said the 14th floor. I called Uncle Rico. He answered on the second ring, and before he could say anything, I said, "Rico, I'm not angry. I need you to be somewhere tomorrow morning, and I need you not to tell Damian." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice I had not heard from him since my father's funeral, "Adrian, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand what I was voting on." I said, "I know, Rico. That's why I need you tomorrow." And I called Damian. I did not tell him anything. I just said, "Congratulations on your first day. I hope Monday goes the way you're expecting." He said, gently, almost kindly, "Adrian, I know this is hard. I know you gave a lot to this company. There's going to be a role for you. Preston and I have talked about it. Something advisory. Something with dignity. You'll always be family." "That's generous of you," I said. "I mean it, Adrian." "I know you do." I hung up. I sat in my kitchen at the small table where my mother used to make me do my homework, and I took the pen out of my pocket and turned it in my hands. "Build slow, sign careful." My father had said those words to me at that same table, one afternoon in the fall of 1993, when I was 9 years old, and he had made me read a permission slip for a school field trip 3 times before I signed it. I had not understood then why it mattered. I understood now. Monday morning, 6:45 a.m., I was already at my desk. Not the CEO office on the 14th floor. I had cleared that out on Friday, box or no box. My desk now was in a small suite 2 floors down, in the space I had quietly leased 6 months ago under SMW Operations, LLC, on the 12th floor of the same building. The sign on the door said simply SMW Operations. No fanfare. No logo yet, just letters on frosted glass. Yolanda arrived at 7. Maggie arrived at 7:15 with 2 paralegals and a banker's box of documents. Uncle Rico arrived at 7:30 in a suit that fit better than his boardroom suit had, and he came over and put a hand on my shoulder and did not say anything, which was the right thing to say. Elena Kowalski arrived at 7:45, escorted by Detective Ruiz and a second officer whose name I did not catch. Detective Ruiz was a compact woman in her 40s with a very still face. She had a warrant in a manila folder. She had already coordinated with local police. She told me quietly that she needed me to stay on the 12th floor when things began upstairs. I said I understood. At 8:55, my phone lit up with a text from a security officer on the 14th floor. It was a man named Cyrus who had worked in this building for 19 years and who I had personally promoted to head of security 4 years ago. "They're here," the text said. "Both of them." I sat with my hand on my father's pen and I waited. At 9:02, Cyrus texted again. "He's in your office. Holloway is in the conference room next door. What do you want me to do?" I typed back, "Let them settle in. Let them have coffee. In 15 minutes, please escort them both together down to 12. Tell them there's an urgent operational matter that requires the CEO's attention. Don't say which CEO." Cyrus texted back a single word: "Understood." Maggie looked at me from across the small conference room I had set up on the 12th floor. "You're being kinder than I would be," she said. I shook my head. "I'm not being kind. I'm being clear. I want him to walk in here on his own 2 feet. I want him to sit down at that table. I want him to see who is here, and I want him to understand in front of witnesses exactly what he signed his name to on Thursday. I don't want him to be able to tell himself later that any of this happened to him. I want him to know he did it to himself." Maggie nodded slowly, and Preston, I said, "is not walking out of this building the same way he walked in." At 9:20, the elevator on the 12th floor chimed. Cyrus stepped out first, then my brother. Then Preston Holloway, one hand still holding a paper coffee cup, his suit as immaculate as it had been on Thursday, his silver hair swept back, his practiced smile in place. The smile lasted about 3 seconds. Because the first thing Preston Holloway saw, standing directly across the reception area of SMW Operations, LLC, was Elena Kowalski. And Elena Kowalski was looking at him the way a person looks at a debt they have carried for 5 years and are finally about to hand back. Preston stopped walking. Damian, who was 2 steps behind him and had not yet seen Elena, bumped gently into his shoulder. "Preston, what is it?" Preston did not answer. I stepped out of the conference room and I said in a voice that did not shake, "Damian, Mr. Halberstam, please come in. We have a great deal to discuss." The conference room on the 12th floor was smaller than the one upstairs. That was on purpose. I wanted my brother close to me. I wanted Preston close enough that I could watch his hands. We sat down, Damian across from me. Preston beside Damian, Maggie on my left, Uncle Rico on my right, Yolanda at the head of the table with a laptop open. Elena Kowalski sat quietly at the far end, folder in front of her, hands folded on top of it. Detective Ruiz stood by the door. Damian's eyes moved around the room the way a man's eyes move when he is trying to build a story fast enough to keep up with what he is seeing. He landed on me last. "Adrian," he said carefully, "what is this?" "This," I said, "is your first day, Damian. I wanted to make sure you understood what you took over." I opened the binder Maggie had prepared. I turned it so that it faced him. I laid my father's pen across the top of the page. "On Thursday morning," I said, "you were elected Chief Executive Officer of White Industrial Solutions, Incorporated. That vote was legal. That vote is final. Congratulations." Damian frowned. He did not know yet what was wrong. He knew only that something was wrong. "White Industrial Solutions, Incorporated," I continued, "is a Delaware holding company. It owns shares. It owns nothing else. It has no employees. It has no revenue. It has no bank account other than a small operating float sufficient to pay its annual filing fees and its board's expenses. In the last fiscal year, White Industrial Solutions, Incorporated, generated $11,400 of income, all of it from interest on that float. Damian's mouth had opened slightly. He had not yet closed it. The trucks, I said. The plants, the Reno hub, the aerospace contract, the patents, the customer agreements, the $80 million credit line, the payroll of 642 people, all of that belongs to a separate operating entity called SMW Operations, LLC. I incorporated it 6 years ago. I migrated every operating asset into it over the 18 months following that incorporation. Every step of that migration was documented, disclosed in the annual reports that were sent to every shareholder, including you, and voted on by the board of White Industrial Solutions at the time, a board on which you held a seat you never attended. I turned a page. SMW Operations, LLC is 90% owned by the holding company you now run. The other 10% is founders' equity held by me personally, in exchange for the intellectual property I developed and contributed. That 10% carries Class A founders' rights, which include, among other things, sole authority to appoint and remove the Chief Executive Officer of SMW Operations. Another page. I am and remain the Chief Executive Officer of SMW Operations, LLC. Which is to say, of everything our father built and everything I built on top of it. The office you sat in this morning belongs to the holding company. The desk you sat at is leased from SMW Operations at a rate I set on Friday afternoon. I looked at him. His face had gone very still. You are the CEO, Damian. You are the CEO of a name on a door. The room was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the low hum of the building's ventilation. I could hear Preston Halloway breathing carefully through his nose beside my brother. Damian looked at Preston, not at me. At Preston. That, more than anything, was the moment I knew my brother in a way I had not known him in a decade. He was not looking at his consultant for advice. He was looking at him the way a child looks at the parent who was supposed to have read the map. Preston did not look back at him. Preston was looking at Alina Kowalski. Peter, Alina said quietly from her end of the table. She used his real name. She said it the way a person says a name they have rehearsed saying for 5 years. It's been a long time. Preston did not answer. You remember me, she said. It was not a question. Preston's practiced smile came back briefly and then failed. He looked down at his coffee cup, which he was still, absurdly, holding. Detective Ruiz stepped forward from the door. She said, without raising her voice, Mr. Halberstam, my name is Detective Anita Ruiz, Scottsdale Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violation of the terms of your prior federal supervised release. I'd like you to stand up slowly and place your hands on the table, please. Preston stood up slowly. He placed his hands on the table. He did it with the practiced calm of a man who had done it before. He did not look at Damian. He did not look at me. He looked, of all things, at his coffee cup as if it had betrayed him. Detective Ruiz walked him out. The door closed behind them. The room was very quiet. Damian was still sitting. He had not moved. Adrian, he said. His voice had lost all of its rehearsal. Adrian, I didn't know about him. About any of that. I swear on Dad's grave, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. He put his hands over his face. His shoulders started to shake, not theatrically, just tired. Just the shaking of a man who has, in the last 4 minutes, understood something about the last 2 years of his life. Uncle Rico reached over and put a hand on the back of my brother's neck. He did not say anything. Rico had always been better than the rest of us at not saying anything. I stood up. I picked up my father's pen. I walked around the table and I stopped beside my brother and I put my hand on his shoulder. You can stay in the building today, I said quietly. The office upstairs is still yours. It's a nice office. You've earned the view, if not the title. Take the day. Take the week. When you're ready to talk about what happens next, come find me on 12. He did not look up. He just nodded under my hand. I walked out of the room. Peter Halberstam, I stopped calling him Preston the moment Alina said his name, was arraigned that Wednesday in federal court. He was denied bail on the basis of prior flight and the ongoing nature of the fraud. Alina Kowalski's civil suit, which her old attorney had let die on a technicality, was refiled by Maggie's firm on a pro bono basis the following month. 3 more of his prior victims came forward once the initial press release went out. There was a woman in Sacramento who had lost a family vineyard. A man in Charleston who had lost a small shipbuilding operation. A widow in Duluth who had lost a chain of hardware stores her husband had built over 40 years. The pattern, when the FBI laid it out in the eventual indictment, was almost boring in its consistency. Find the weak family member, groom them for a year, use them as the wedge, strip the assets, vanish. He pled out 14 months later to a sentence that will keep him in federal custody until he is nearly 70. Alina Kowalski was in the courtroom for the sentencing. She did not speak. She just sat in the second row with her hands folded in her lap, and when they let him out, she stood up, and she walked out into the Cleveland afternoon, and she went home. Damian did not come find me on 12 that week, or the week after. He went instead to a residential treatment program in Prescott, Arizona, that Uncle Rico had researched quietly on his own. He stayed for 90 days. When he came out, he called me from the parking lot of the facility, and he did not ask for anything. He just said, "Adrian, I'm sorry. I don't know how to be sorry for 10 years in one phone call, so I'm going to try to be sorry in small ways for a long time. Is that all right with you?" I said, "That's all right with me." We restructured. On paper, White Industrial Solutions, Inc., was folded back into SMW Operations in a clean reverse merger, and Damian voluntarily converted his 28% inherited holding into a non-voting economic interest held in a trust with a professional trustee. The trust pays him a monthly distribution sufficient to live on modestly. It cannot be borrowed against. It cannot be sold or pledged. If he relapses, the trustee has discretion to reduce distributions and route funds into treatment instead. He signed those documents himself. He read them 3 times before he did. I made sure of it. He works now, part-time, in the community outreach office at our Reno hub. He is not an executive. He is not on the board. He runs a monthly program that partners with 2 local recovery centers to offer warehouse jobs to people coming out of treatment. He is good at it, in a way I would not have predicted. He knows how to talk to those people. He has, it turns out, credentials for that work that none of the rest of us have. Uncle Rico sits at my right hand at every board meeting now. Mel Aronofsky and Peter Bloom offered to resign after the Monday morning meeting. I asked them both to stay. They had voted the way my brother told them to vote because my brother was family, and I would rather be surrounded by men who valued family too much than by men who did not value it enough. Jim Kettering did resign. That was his choice, and I respected it, and we still exchange Christmas cards. Yolanda is president of SMW Operations now. Her daughter Camille was promoted to director of financial planning in January. Maggie Chen sits on our board. I still carry my father's pen. I carried it, in fact, 6 months after that Monday morning, out to the cemetery on the ridge above town, where my parents are buried side by side under a single stone. It was early October. The light was doing the thing October light does in that part of the country, where it turns everything gold at the edges without quite warming anything. I sat on the small stone bench my father had bought for my mother's grave in 2003, and I took the pen out of my pocket, and I turned it in my fingers. Build slow, sign careful. He had said it to me 100 times. He had never said it to Damian, because Damian, even at 9 years old, had never sat still long enough to hear it. That was not my father's failing. It was not my brother's either exactly. It was just the shape of things. Some people are built to read the fine print. Some people are built to be the reason the fine print exists. I sat there for a long time. I did not cry. I had done my crying already, in different weeks, in different rooms, most of it years ago in a house I no longer lived in, married to a man who had been right about me. I sat and I watched the light move across my parents' names on the stone, and I thought about the trucks in the rail yard down in the valley, and the 642 families who were, this Tuesday afternoon, eating dinner because of a company my father had started in a leased garage in 1981. I thought about my brother in Reno, teaching a man just out of a 90-day program how to run a forklift. I put the pen back in my pocket. I stood up. I went home.